Welcome. This is the How to Close Deals. I am John Rector. I am the president of Social Media Target LLC. These are the four companies that I've worked for the last 34 years. I've had various titles for each, everything from founder to chief experience officer. Doesn't really matter what my title is. I always knew what my job was, which was sales. Sales and marketing are kind of blurred today in 2019, but growing up in IBM had a great definition for marketing, which is creating an environment in which a sale can take place. And that's how I kind of view marketing even today, especially for B2B or anything that is a large deal. This particular class is designed for this hour-long lecture is for if you have a sales force. So if your organization is pure in the fact that your buy button is your sales force, this won't do you any good. This class is only interesting to those that have a sales force, that have to go out and sell, have to have a human interaction in order to close a deal. All right, let's go to the threshold of procrastination. The threshold of procrastination is a place that you've all been. You might not have called it the threshold of procrastination, but you've been there. Everybody's already in agreement that your deal makes perfect sense. They're absolutely with you. They're going like, oh, wow, yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. Whether it's a house, a car, a B2B software deal, it doesn't matter. Everybody knows, but there's something amiss. Something's not right. Things aren't getting done. You can feel it. Those meetings aren't getting scheduled. Somebody is not making the plans to be in a certain city. Phone calls aren't getting returned. Emails aren't. You're stuck in the procrastination zone. And this is all about how do we get out of procrastination and into action? How do we create a sufficient force that will move your deal, your massive deal, out of the procrastination zone into action? Action being over that threshold. That threshold is measured in seconds, meaning just a few seconds ago, nobody was signing a contract. Now both parties are signing a contract. A few seconds ago, nobody was going to buy that car today. Now we're buying that car today. A few seconds ago, nobody was going to sign that buyer's contract. Now people are signing the contract. That's what I mean. That threshold is a property line. It is measured in a few seconds. And when you've kind of went from a body at rest to a body in motion in physics, that's what this equation is from physics. It's probably the most popular mathematical equation, which is force equals mass times acceleration. That's all I'm saying here in business is that we've created a sufficient force to move your deal into action. For most of us, we only have three things that we do at that threshold. The first one I kind of think of is a dial. That dial is price. I always picture it as a big dial. I'm either moving it clockwise or counterclockwise. It's just a dial that I call price. If I know that he's standing there looking at that Porsche and I can feel that he's going to leave without buying it today, I know that probably this is going to slip into the second quarter. I could start to turn that dial on price and make a more compelling argument. The number one thing that salespeople do at the threshold procrastination is use price. Number two, it looks more like a soundboard at a recording studio. It's got all those little dials that you kind of move up and down. That, you know, if you can picture in your mind's eye a soundboard at a recording studio, and those are called terms and conditions. So I can start to say, well, hold on, what if we do this, that, or the other thing? So all of our terms and condition kind of looks like a soundboard, and we can start to play with those to try to close this deal today versus some time in the future. And then the third is called a promise, and that's the one we're going to talk about. That's the only one we're going to talk about. We're going to leave price, terms and conditions off the table. If you're a sales professional, you know how to play with price and terms and conditions, but promises, there's something to be learned. My 34 years of industry experience has taught me a lot about promises. Oh, wow. I wish I could go back in time to when I was early days at IBM. I wish somebody would have taught me this. I really do. And that's why I'm giving this class, because I want you to know the secret to this promise. And the first, and it's going to come in three flavors. Let me get to the right slide. Yeah, here we go. So co-author, don't make assumptions, don't get defensive. Let's talk about co-authoring. First of all, let's talk about a promise. A promise, I call it one of the four states of human attention. A promise is pretty easy. You do them all the time, rather to yourself or to another person. Anytime you state a single sentence, it's just one sentence. It's always expressed in future tense, and it can be measured. Let me take you to like my kitchen last night. I'm looking at my wife, my daughter. I'm saying, I will take her to school tomorrow. I just made a promise. So let me invite you into my kitchen. And I'm going to just have you tell me how many promises. So there's four of us in the kitchen now. How many promises are there? You know, probably you're just going to say one. You know, you just heard me say, I'll take her to school tomorrow. That's the only promise that you see in the kitchen. But that's not true. Really cool. There's two promises in the kitchen. My wife has one, my daughter has one, mine doesn't matter. So that number one, co-authorship is so important. You don't make promises to another human being. You've made millions of promises to yourself. I will lose 20 pounds. That's an agreement. All promises are agreements that you're making with yourself, as you're going to learn here in a second. My daughter and my wife have multiple parties. Some of them I don't even know about. But there's always parties involved, one or more. And that promise is the only promises that you've ever done are with yourself. Every time since the beginning of your life that you've expressed a sentence in future tense that can be measured, you've co-authored a promise with somebody else. You've never authored it. My wife and my daughter have a different promise in their head. They've inked a different deal. It's weird. But once you get used to this, it saves you like, oh, wow, pre-qualifying people, closing deals today, not tomorrow. It becomes so much easier. So co-authorship is just knowing that when whatever you say, okay, let me call the seller and I'm going to see if we can do this. And by the way, I can, la, la, la. It doesn't matter what you say. You just co-authored. You have to understand what just happened is the husband and wife, the guy that's buying the car, the vice president, the CFO, doesn't matter who just heard you say that thing. They just authored a promise. Now, it's very important that you do not make assumptions about the promise that was just done. In the case of my wife, because I'm going to use this one because I know the reveal. Hindsight's always 20/20. I know what really happened, so that's how I can use it forensically to get this across. My wife has gone and done a promise in her head that involves a third party that I don't even know about. Her name is Betsy. Betsy works in the attendance department, and my wife is hearing me say I'm going to take her to school tomorrow. That just means that she's going to get there. She is not going to get a call from Betsy in the attendance department. That's very important because that's happened more than once. So I'm not aware of this, and if I'm making assumptions, more than likely my assumption looks like this, right? Which I just made a promise, and my wife's promise, the one that she inked, looks like this. He will drop her off at school. Well, that's not the promise she made at all. Me dropping her off at school is not the completion criteria that she's looking for at all. Meanwhile, my daughter's got a completely different deal going on in her head, where there's 6 parties involved, 3 girlfriends, and she's embarrassed by my truck. So guess what? I'm not even dropping her off in the front of the school. I'm dropping her off almost a block away. So the important part about this right now is when you're with your client / prospect, whatever you're saying in the future tense, know that that promise has just been used. That statement, let me call it, that you just said is being used. Your words, your written sentence in an email and a text, they are being used in their promise. Number 2, do not make assumptions about that. You don't really know. Now I'm going to go back to this one because there is something that you can do instead of trying to understand. It turns out that I don't really need to know about Betsy in the attendance department. I don't really need to know the 3 girlfriends. I don't need to spend a whole lot of time trying to figure out the exact nature of the promise that you're writing. That's actually a waste of time. What I should be doing is where you see the M, the mass, and force equals mass times acceleration. The M, what you should be doing is assessing 2 things really about the promise that they are writing, not yours. Again, remember, you only co-author. So they're authoring their own promise. My wife has a different one than my daughter. Your prospect, rather you sell cars, houses, concert tickets, B2B software, it doesn't matter. They're writing a promise. What you want to do is try to go ahead and assess that promise. The easy one, he's standing there, he's looking at the Porsche. He's at the dealership, he's looking at the Porsche. He's not looking at anything else but the Porsche. Of course, I'm making assumptions already, which I shouldn't be, when I should be doing one thing, which is assessing on that scale from 1 to 5. Let me show you the scale. Let me see, where is my scale? That is not my, here's my scale. Thank you. Go ahead and know that you do not have to know what his promise is or her promise is. It's just like being in a dark room. You don't have to know what it is, but you can still feel the weight of it. You can tell me if it's a cylinder. You can tell me if it's bigger than a cell phone. There's a lot that you can describe even though you don't know what it is. You're in the dark. You will always be in the dark when it comes to other people's promises. Do not waste your time trying to figure out what their promise is so that you can rewrite or edit their promise. Don't do that, but do measure it. Get that pain level right. When he's looking at that Porsche in the dealership, and he's telling me the story about his mentor, and his mentor had that particular model Porsche model, and that he's finally arrived in a position in life where he can afford that. That Porsche is not four wheels with an ignition switch. I'm not worried about him looking at the Mercedes or the BMW. I already know what's going on in terms of how much this Porsche is going to mean to him. You know, can he do without it? If I make the assumption, as most of us will in this situation, of course, nobody needs a Porsche. Nope. You know, he really can't function properly without that Porsche, because for him, just for that one particular individual, the whole thing, the whole point of life, the whole purpose in life, all the sacrifices he's ever made, relational, everything that he ever made decisions on, not going out on a Friday night with his friend, all manifests itself with that Porsche right now. That Porsche is not a car at all. It is a manifestation of the fact that he finally arrived. He can't function properly without that thing. If you'll notice, when you get really good at co-authoring promises, you shut up. So many of us salespeople will lock and load on feature function promises and keep going feature function promises, and all we're doing is messing it up. The promise that he's writing, and all I'm doing is standing there and trying to participate in it. The only thing I could say to somebody who is in that situation is congratulations. Wow, that's pretty cool. What was your mentor's name, by the way? Wow. Just stick with that. Do I need to mention one thing about a Porsche versus a BMW's price performance or cylinder? No, not a thing. Congratulations. What was your mentor's name? Those are the little things that I can do as a co-author to strengthen the promise that he is writing. The more attached he is to that, the more likely that he's going to walk with that Porsche today. Same thing on a B2B software. It's the founder of E2Open, supply chain management. You could feel the pain when it came to demand planning, forecasting. Nobody ever gets forecasting right. Everybody knows how expensive it is, but there we are. But at the individual level, when I'm dealing with that vice president and he's talking and he's saying things, and I keep going over the feature function stuff, and I keep talking about how wonderful we are versus our competitors, all I'm doing is more damage than good. If I want to close that deal sooner than later, all I got to do is weigh his promise. I don't have to have it right, but I got to weigh it. Where is the weight of that promise? What can't he function properly with? If I could go back, one of the first things I would do with IBM is go back to AVX Corporation. John Gilbertson, the CEO, chairman of the board at the time, I could swear that I had this right. All we had to do was upgrade the IBM computer. Of course, everybody was going to do that. When I'm walking through the cafeteria, the finance department, accounts receivables, accounts payable, I could swear they're singing my praises. Yay, John Rector, go, 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 because everybody wanted a better response time. I had no idea how far off the mark I was. I wasn't even close. I was nowhere close to being anywhere towards the center of mass. He was getting ready to spend all his money on tantalum, tantalum manufacturing capabilities, because where his promise was, what he's architecting is leadership, market domination for tantalum capacitors. How big, that's why you see percent of scope there, right? So again, pain level for him, and you got to be careful with pain level. It could be perceived as pleasure as well. Selling concert tickets Some people are needing that concert ticket because they've got to get away from work for a while. You know, they'll express it in pain. You can still measure it. You know, how necessary is it really? Others will express the same thing in pleasure. I always do this with life and death. Somebody might say, I don't want to die. Somebody might say, I want to live. Pain and pleasure is the same thing, especially in the human condition. Pain and pleasure is the exact same system. No difference. So I just say pain level, but it could be on a pleasure scale as well. And for John Gilbertson, that was certainly the case. That it wasn't pain. It was, I want to be the big guy. I want to be the dominant leader for tantalum capacitor. That's where his head was going. What percentage of the scope of the deal was computer response time? If I would have been smart, I would have known at the time what I would have been measuring, you know, a 4 or 5 in the room, dark room, right? I don't really know the exact details of the promise that he's writing. I don't have to, but at least I know what the percentage of the scope was, and my ability to co-author better with IBM Credit Corporation financing everything, not only the computer upgrade, but financing all of the tantalum equipment that he's going to need, maybe slightly even less than, but not too far off the mark, at least knowing that a computer upgrade was a line item for achieving tantalum market domination versus response time. The response time thing wasn't going to sell. Now, I always say the threshold of procrastination, meaning that all of these things eventually will happen. It's just, will they happen sooner? And that's our ability to get, you know, away from our own thinking, to stop being assumptive about what they are. Because, you know, as long as I'm assuming that John Gilbertson is just thinking about response time like all of the employees that work for AVX Corporation, guess what? I'm still going nowhere. Nothing's getting closed in the first quarter. You know, all of the funds are going to go towards that. If very few words going out, and yeah, and that's great. Wow, congratulations. Man, that's going to be wonderful. You do realize that, you know, that means a lot more orders, and we're kind of choking already. So, I mean, just, you do realize that upgrading the computer is kind of a prerequisite for world domination in tantalum, right? You know, that conversation I just said that came out of my mouth is profoundly different than me staring at a guy in a car dealership, reminding him that a Porsche has a better blah, blah, blah than a BMW. Nothing. John Gilbertson's listening to me when I mention the word tantalum. He's not hearing a word I'm saying when I say response time. Can I get a computer upgrade done even sooner? Hell yeah, if it's a prerequisite for tantalum domination. Don't make assumptions. Know that they're authoring their own promises. Measure it, feel it, measure it. Know if it's a 1 or a 2, step away. Nobody's that good. Nothing's getting done. If you're at a 3, you got a chance. 4 and 5, the train's left the station. Something's being done. You just might not be on the train because you're oblivious. And the only time you're oblivious, just like me, is I'm feeling very validated in the cafeteria at AVX. I'm feeling like everybody's rooting for me. I should swear I'm in the right time zone called response time, but I'm nowhere close. Man, I had no idea that all the gravitational pull is towards tantalum. I think I'm dealing with response time, but I am not. The percentage of scope is so important because once I realized in that car dealership that that Porsche is 99% of the dream manifestation, I don't have to do a thing. All I have to do is ask the little stuff like, what was your mentor's name? Wow. You really, I mean, that's amazing. I mean, it's an honor to meet you. It sounds like you've done a lot of hard work. Congratulations again on achieving, your success. I don't have to say a word about that portion. The more I just talk about his mentor and his own personal successes at the, he definitely leaving with that Porsche today. Same thing with somebody buying a home or listing with you. Oh my God, you realtors, you really have to think in terms of what is their promise has nothing to do with you. Is it the fact that there's 58,000 of you just in the Charleston area alone? You're too competitive. You get wrapped up too much in what you can. You're all selling your own promises to everybody. And remember, especially with home buying or selling, there's a big, big, beautiful promise. There's kids involved in that. There's a big, beautiful promise. And how can you softly be a part of that promise, rather on the buy side or the sell side? And remember, you don't have to understand it. Don't make assumptions about it. That's where you always get wrong. You are 100% guaranteed that your assumptions about their promise is wrong. Do not waste your time trying to understand their promise. Waste the time, but do measure it. Measure it. Now, do they have to do this? Do they have to do it before the kids start school? I mean, measure it. That house, that neighborhood, that school district, what percentage of the overall scope is it? Is anything going to do? If it was me, any car will do. I am not caught up in one way or the other around anything that is a Porsche, this, that, or the other thing. Just not me. For somebody else, it's everything. But you've got to be honest about the percentage of the scope that you are in. If I know for a fact that there is no way that I could be more than 1 or 2% of the overall scope, if Tantalum and AVX, if the best that I can do computer response time is 1 or 2%, then I need to walk away. I need to focus on something else. That's just how it is. Now, that wasn't the case because clearly I can see the opportunity there to say, that's great. We're going to dominate the tantalum market, which means we're going to be bringing in a lot more orders and we're already choking. Let's just go ahead and make the computer upgrade a line item in conquering the world via tantalum. Works every time. No problem. But again, we don't want to get in the habit of making too many assumptions about what they're doing. We got to know what percentage we're at. And then going back to my kitchen very quickly, is that we can't get defensive about how we co-author. I'm standing on the stage, 200 people, and everybody's getting a free book. It came out of my mouth, 200 people in the audience. Everybody here today gets a free book. I'm not in charge of the logistics on this. With 200 people, I can guarantee you, absolutely guarantee you, somebody is going to get home that didn't have a book, and somebody is going to email me and blame me personally that I am the reason that they didn't get a book, that I lied. It's my fault. That's why you can't get caught up. I always say, a promise is a future tense sentence that can be measured. And that measurement is always true or false. I always say that to know that I need you to know it's black and white. There's no la-di-da-da. A promise always turns into an outcome. An outcome is very, very important. The outcomes is everything. The only reason people ever do business with you is because of your outcomes. If you go to LinkedIn, LinkedIn never has a future tense sentence unless you're selling. Everything on LinkedIn is in past tense. Nobody gives a shit about your promises because, again, why? Who cares about your promises? Nobody does. You don't, I mean, you have never once authored a promise with anybody. You think you have, but you haven't. They've always authored their own, even if they don't know they have, they have. A lot of people just are not conscious of the fact that they're authoring their own promise. You know, if you watch a Budweiser commercial and you're looking at that scene, you know, because the advertising agency, they know what they're doing. They're selling sex and party and lifestyle around, you know, a bottle of beer. They're not selling the ingredients or any of that kind of stuff, right? If you buy into that, you know, is it Budweiser's fault that you didn't get to date that kind of girl, or you didn't have those kind of friends? No. He authored that promise all on his own. Was it my fault that that person didn't get their book? No. And by the way, when I stand on stage and I say one sentence that is in future tense, everybody here will is the future tense, will get a book. There's 200 different promises out there, by the way. That's like the essence of co-authorship. Know that everybody just wrote their own. And some of those are going to be false. So measuring true or false promises is not important because they're not your promises. You just co-authored. Now, integrity is very important. And that's for you. So always know you have to be impeccable with your word. When you are co-authoring, whatever you're saying, everybody here will get a book. You know, I had to do that with great integrity. I'm not like, oh, well, it sounds good, but I know we only have 100 books. No, nobody is ever allowed to say everybody here gets a book unless you got a book for everyone. That's the integrity that you have as a salesperson. Your foundation of which you stand on is integrity. As everybody probably knows, I still have a resentment against every airline because they oversell planes. I don't think that's fair. I don't know how the CEO of United Airlines thinks it's okay to overbook an airplane. It's just lack of integrity in the entire industry, and for some reason they've rationalized it, justified it, that it's okay, but it is not. Integrity is that if you say something, you're impeccable with your word, and you say everybody gets a book, everybody gets a book. Now, do I have to worry about somebody feels like I'm the reason they didn't get a book? No, I am not losing any sleep over the fact that some are false and true promises that you're writing on your own. Am I in diet pill industry? Look at the diet gimmicks that have been in 1954. $60 billion was spent in diet pill gimmickry, of which only 3% of those people achieved any level of success. 97% were false promises. Again, they're making the promises to themselves. The next year, those same people are spending $60 billion. In 2018, guess how much was spent in diet pill gimmickry? $60 billion. Do those people think that they got a really, really, really high chance? No, they're writing promises that they already know are going to come false. And remember, it's their promise. You don't need to worry about it. You don't even need to make assumptions about it. And certainly don't get defensive about your contribution in that. You know, the only thing you got to worry about is the integrity of your word. That's it. Do not get defensive when their promise didn't meet up with yours. Now, with getting back to my wife, and I know that my wife, I did not make any assumptions. She did not tell me about Betsy in the attendance department. But when I just dropped off my daughter a block before, am I smart enough to make sure that my daughter still makes it to school, even though she doesn't want anybody to see her in my ugly ass truck. That's okay. But there I am. That's part of who I am. That's part of what I do to make sure that I have got my part of co-authorship with a high degree of integrity, making sure that what I co-authored by accident or by intention, as long as it came out of my mouth, or it's in a text message, or it's in an email, and it's expressed in future tense, I'm in a co-authorship position. If Betsy calls from the attendance department and says, what happened to your daughter again? I told you this was the last warning. I'm getting a phone call. Do I need to get defensive? No, I do not. I do not need to get defensive. Yeah, I did my job. I did my part. I dropped her off. I don't know. No, it's a waste of time to get defensive on these issues. Complete waste of time to get defensive on the issue. Did the promise not happen correctly the way that they authored it themselves? It did not. Do you need to get defensive about your co-authorship? No. Do you need to be like willing to accept your responsibility? If you really did drop her off a block ahead, you immediately got on your iPhone, drove away, made a whole bunch of assumptions, the fact that she was still going to get to school on time, that, blah, blah, blah. No, that's not fair either. You were making a bunch of assumptions. You kind of trusted in the universe somehow through, your own laziness, really, that you did not take the time to make sure that she got to school. Because you got to remember, rather implied or explicit, you're not saying I'm going to promise to drop her off somewhere. I'm going to get my daughter to school. Explicit or implied, doesn't matter. That's what you've got to be concerned with in co-authoring promises. And remember, anytime you say a statement, a single sentence that's expressed in future tense that can be measured, you're co-authoring regardless if you want to or not. Because remember, anybody that can hear you or read you can take what you just said and integrate it into their own narrative, and they're writing a promise based upon what you did. You just gave kind of raw material to their own manufacturing. And you don't even know what they're making, but you can measure it. And measuring is very important when you're trying to close deals, because you've got to know not only what pain level is it really, no lying to yourself here or your boss. What pain level is that really? And number two, what percentage are you of the total scope? And let me go back to it. Force equals mass times acceleration. The force, obviously, sufficient force to move this from procrastination into action. Your promise is never going to do anything if your mass is low or the attention on your mass is low. Now, keep in mind, the four states of human attention that's what a promise is. A promise is attention. So the rest of the time will be spent just on that. We're at 3:40. We're just perfect on time, and making sure that you know that a promise and action and outcome and interest are the same thing. A promise is stated in future tense. When we say measure it, it's an outcome eventually. I will pay rent. Well, how do we know? Rent is paid. I paid rent. That's past tense. Hey, John, what are you doing right now? I'm paying rent. That's the present tense. That's called an action. Over here, we have plasma, which we call interest, What am I really interested in? Am I just interested in a roof over my head, a roof over my family's head, a house on the beach, something that is pleasing to teenagers, something designed for a lot of parties, blah, blah, blah. Interest, we call that plasma. It's different. And interests are extremely important, especially during negotiations, which is a completely different lecture. But for closing deals, know that it's always promises. All you got to do is focus on promises. Now, understand a promise is an outcome. You know, hey, John, how much? It's $5,000 is what it's going to be to build your website. Okay. What did I just do? I just made a promise. I will build your website for $5,000. It can be measured, meaning there's an implied or explicit deadline in there in 1 month, in 2 months. Who's the deadline? Well, as a co-author, I need to make sure that they are going to hit the right measurement time. Now, remember, just like with my wife, they've got a different way to measure things. This always happens. And by the way, it's notorious that we tend to try to engineer these completion criterias, that we try to engineer these types of deliverables when people are really going to measure us. But it doesn't matter how well we try to do that. All that really matters is when they say. And they are terrible at this. Most customers will never really know exactly how to give you the ultimate measure date, but just know that eventually there's going to be one. In the case of my wife, it was obscure, which is a lack of a phone call. No phone call from Betsy equals success. Nobody gave me that equation. Nobody was going to give me that equation, by the way. Nobody's going to give me that equation, but it's there. Same thing in business. I will build your website for $5,000. Boom. You know, and that's really supposed to be by whatever, and that's what they're saying. But in actuality, once you get even close to that, you find out what the real date is. And then there's this kind of weird phase where they're saying, well, we need to change it. And then, so you got to kind of roll with those punches, knowing that you can't get defensive in any of your original language. Your original language didn't matter anyway. All your promises were just co-author raw materials for their promise. And they're terrible about telling you what their promises are. They're just absolutely terrible. You know, the guy who buying the Porsche, AVX Corporation, they're terrible at these things. You know, everything's like you find out after. But that's why if you can get out of making assumptions and getting defensive, you'd be amazed at what you can see and hear. You know, seeing something in an email that was keep me relevant, John, keep me relevant. I thought it was interesting. One little sentence in an email. What does that mean? You know, do I have to understand it completely? No. But boy, those little clues are very, very important, right? We have to take these clues and know that they will tell us what are we really dealing with, what's really going on, and how do we be a part of their promise as a co-author. Now, sometimes it is important that we speak up and that we take a strong position. You know, I'm a big believer in the fact that our customers are never right. If my customers were always right, they would never need me. You know, part of what I do recently is I'm going, yeah, and look at your open rates on Constant Contact. What an amazing new world that would you ever assume ever that your open rates would be less than 1%? Isn't that amazing? Look around, look at all these smartphones. You know, notice what I'm doing, right? I'm not like really hitting you over the head with it, but I am co-authoring by saying, look around, all these smartphones, your open rates on your constant contact are less than 1%. I'm helping you build stronger promises that work in my favor, right? Really, the only time I'm interesting to anybody is when somebody wants to transform. They know they need to stick a fork in it. That we've always done it this way is killing you. It is certainly not helping you. That's when I'm most interesting. So the little things that I say, that I use with my words to throw out there, pointed in a particular direction around knowing what I know about your business that you need to pay attention to, even though you don't want to. Nobody really wants to accept the fact that yesterday doesn't work anymore. All businesses, I don't care how big you are, Sears and Roebuck, with the best leadership ever, amazing, cannot get past the fact that they can't measure retail sales per square foot. They just can't. All kinds of companies, they will go all the way to the end. They will absolutely go bankrupt before they will change sometimes. That's how married we get to the way things are. And we will fight tooth and nail to keep it that way. Know that promises, outcomes, actions, they're all the same thing. Where do we really want people? Well, simple case at AVX, let's say the upgrade would have worked. Boom, we sign the deal. That creates the action. People start upgrading the computer. And then what's the outcome? The outcome is not the set of actions. The outcome is what? Yeah, it's the past tense of the promise. Actions usually are all those things that will be involved to actually make the outcome true. It's very important to know, the promise is that my tooth pain will no longer be with me. It's easy to state that outcome. My tooth doesn't hurt. All the actions, I've got to call my dentist. I've got to schedule the appointment. I've got to get there. I've got to sit in that chair. I've got to be able to listen to that drill, boom, boom, boom. There's a lot of actions, but that's what you're looking for is action. The only way you get action is the transformation between the promise and the outcomes. That's why action sits in between promises and outcomes. That's why we relate the 4 states of human attention to the 4 states of matter. We're going to go from a promise being a gas to a solid. And the way that we do that is by taking energy out, not increasing, taking energy out of the promise. Once you get past a certain threshold, a gas turns into a liquid. And then once you get past another threshold, there's a threshold, a freezing point, a liquid will turn into a solid. The outcomes stated in past tense, how do I know that my daughter is in school? Well, the way that it's officially measured, no phone call from the attendance department, but it's the same thing as in school, not dropped off near school. That doesn't cut it. That was never the outcome that anybody wanted. A lot of times as sales people, we tend to make promises that are not actually going to be outcomes, but you got to knock that off. Promises are very easy to do. They are just the past tense of whatever you're saying. And remember, they have nothing to do with the Porsche itself. What is the outcome? He has the Porsche. Does it matter if the Porsche has a problem? It does not. He has the Porsche. He has manifested his success based upon a lifelong dream that he has had. He has that model. Now, where would you have completely failed with this promise? Yeah, somehow you were so wonderful, you talked him into a different model. It was the only thing that can actually be an outcome for the promise of, in the case of the guy with the Porsche, was that particular model, because that was the model that his mentor had. You got to make sure that was the outcome. He owns it. So you didn't lease it to him. He actually owns that car that was so important to him, that particular model. Matter of fact, it had to be a particular color. Same thing when you're doing B2B software sales, especially supply chain. You got to be careful here. Demand planning is an art, will always be an art. Forecasting, there's no such thing as an accurate forecast. An accurate forecast is an oxymoron by definition. Even as artificial intelligence starts to become much more involved in the demand sensing and planning process for supply chain, doesn't matter. An accurate forecast, there's no such thing. So you have to be very careful. Now remember, outcomes in business really officially are always measured in using money. I'm not going to say currency, but there's some form of money that will be used to tell us, how did we do? Profit, revenue, balance sheet, cash flow, all kinds of different ways that we can measure. It's not black and white, really. We want money to be black and white. We often feel that money is black and white. We balance our checkbook as though money is black and white, but it's not. In business terms, it's really not. That's why, especially like with social media, return on investment, well, any good chief financial officer will tell you there's no exact pure science to, having an actual down to the penny kind of number on a piece of paper that you can actually 100% verify. It doesn't work that way with money, but it, you can sense it, if it's in the right ballpark, those kinds of things. So with our outcomes, if your promises were so far off the mark, your outcomes didn't even get close to your promises, that's a huge problem. Rather, that was an integrity problem, a lack of capability. You just totally ruined or something happened in the action area where, you made a ton of assumptions, none of which came true, but get that real clear, that the better your outcomes, the better your promises. Matter of fact, the ones who are really, truly good at this, the ones who are stellar, they don't have to make any promises at all. Your outcomes write the promises for you, because remember, your promises don't mean shit anyway. The only thing that matters is the promises that they're writing, and they're writing promises based upon your outcomes. With me, anybody that wants to do business with me as a influencer, as a Facebook creator, you just go to my wall and you see my clients. You click on my clients straight from my wall. You go and you can see how well they're doing. It's all public domain knowledge. You don't have to guess. You can just know without any doubt, do I want that for my business? Yes or no? But it's, very, 100% verifiable. You can see the outcomes, and outcomes are promises. Actions, the only thing that actions are well, actions are always in the here and now. That's kind of like really super important. That's why we draw it as liquid. The other reason we have it a solid for outcomes is that nobody can argue with an outcome. If that's a spherical ball that's in my hand, nobody think that's a pink pyramid. One of the reasons that outcomes are so important, there's a weird thing about outcomes though, and especially as sales executives, we know this throughout, which is as soon as there is an outcome, nobody's attention is on it. Human attention will not stay on an outcome. If you need your human attention to be somewhere else, turn it into an outcome and it will disappear. Human attention is allergic to high probability events in your life. That's why most accidents happen 2 miles from home. The more familiar and consistent something is, the less human attention is needed. Human attention is designed for surprise and wonder. It's its nature. That's what it does. It's how it keeps you alive. So that's why it loves promises. Promises are full of surprise and wonder. It's a gas. It fills the room. Outcomes, as soon as you say, I closed those 6 deals, there's a lot of attention on you when you say the following: I will close those 6 deals this month. A lot of attention is on you. As soon as you close those 6 deals, as soon as you say, I closed those 6 deals, no attention, none. What have you done for me recently? A lot of attention on somebody getting through 4 years of higher ed. As soon as they graduate, not one person has attention on their school life anymore. Attention just runs from outcomes. As soon as you convert a promise into an outcome, attention leaves it. Attention has this entropy where it will always go in the opposite direction, away from the solid. It is all attention, just like in the universe, the most abundant state of matter is plasma. That is the most abundant state of human attention, interest. If you could go across 7.7 billion people, everybody has attention. Everybody's attention is somewhere right now. Regardless if you're asleep, regardless if you're in a coma, your attention is somewhere right now, this very second. If you could stop the planet, go across and query 7.7 billion people and plot where their attention is, because it doesn't have to be where their feet is. It would, first and foremost, everybody, regardless of age, matter of fact, you can still be in your mother's womb, you have attention. You've got attention before you have your first breath. And that attention will always lend towards interest, promises, never outcomes. Outcomes are so important for human interaction. If 2 human beings really want to have a discussion, rather in life or in business, it's an outcome is the bridge. It is so much easier for me to show you that which has already been done. That's why it's always drawn like the ball in a hand. We can see it. Nobody's in doubt. Nobody's thinking. Now, when something's a promise, some people really can see a pink pyramid in the vapor, in the humidity in the room. Because remember, a gas fills the room. You cannot put your hands on it. You can't see it. Even actions in liquid form, you can argue with it. That's why I always show it as a cupped hand. Your actions are like water and you could slosh it around, but some people are going to argue with you on the purity of that water. Some people are not even going to see the water. They're only going to see your hands. Some people are going to say that, it's half full, it's half empty. There's all kinds of ways that human beings can debate with each other when it comes to actions, but not with outcomes. And thank you very much for listening to 1 whole hour of how to close deals. And by the way, you can ask questions in the, I'm going to end it because most people watch this at a later time, but even later on, you can ask questions in the comments and I will get notified and do my best to answer them.